I want to welcome all of you to our webinar this afternoon. We're so excited that you're all joining us, and we are going to get a wonderful presentation and discussion about how to make our presentations have more impact, which is exactly what we all want to do. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Judy Browse, and I'm the Executive Director of the North American Association for Environmental Education. And I know that a number of you are so sad, like we all are, grieving for our dear friend Pepe Marcos Iga. And I wanted to let you know we just sent a tribute out, and we set up a GoFundMe campaign for his family. And for those of you who don't know Pepe, he has been a part of NAAEE for years and years, on the board, the chair of NAAEE, and has done so much for environmental education in the field of conservation. So those of you who know him might want to go to the GoFundMe campaign. We're trying to help support his family, given his untimely passing. And he just was an amazing guy, and would be happy that we're doing a webinar on communication, which was what he was all about. So if you have any questions, let me know, and we just sent out a tribute earlier. I also want to thank our affiliate co-hosts for supporting the webinar series. We're trying to bring so many new ideas, and we've got so many wonderful affiliates across the country who are working with us. So welcome and thank you all. And as I mentioned earlier, we are always trying to bring new ideas, new thinking to the field of environmental education, and these webinars are one way that we do that. We have monthly webinars, and sometimes we throw in a few more, but really trying to present new speakers, new ideas, and new thinking. And I know many of you know how to use Zoom, but I just want to remind you that everybody is muted because we have so many people on the line, and the way to talk to us is through the chat room. So you can ask questions at any time, you can comment, you can post things, but please feel free to use the chat room all the time to communicate with us, and Dennis will be doing more about that. And please, as we go along, post your questions, but we'll also answer them periodically when Dennis slows down throughout the presentation, and then at the very end, we'll answer as many as we can. So think about that, and if you have any technical problems, please email Kristen or Sai, who are both amazing, if you're having any technical problems or if you have some other needs. And now it gives me a great pleasure. We are so lucky to have Dennis here today as our guest speaker. And for those of you who don't know Dennis, or if you've never been in a workshop by Dennis, you are in for a treat. He has decades of experience as an organizer, an educator, and a communicator. And he's currently the director of Spitfire Strategies learning programs. And that means he helps with everything related to capacity building, strategy, training, and more. He works with foundations and nonprofits of all sizes, including our size, and we're lucky to have him. And he helps all of us build organizational and personal strategic communication skills to help us meet our goals. NAAEE has worked with Spitfire Strategies from the day they were born, and for so many years they have helped us gain wisdom from their experience in how to engage audience, get messages out, and develop strategic communication plans, and so much more. Dennis also heads Spitfire's executive training program, which is designed to help nonprofit leaders develop the skills and strategies they need to lead highly communicating organizations. And he's coordinated trainings for the human rights grantees of the Ford Foundation in Brazil and South Africa, the European Climate Foundation in Brussels, the Energy Foundation's China Sustainability Energy Program in Beijing. And he also led an international storytelling convening for the Rockefeller Foundation in Italy. He's worked for Planned Parenthood before coming to Spitfire, and was a community-based organizer working on LGBT, youth empowerment, media and arts, and cultural diversity. And so we are so thrilled to have Dennis with us today.
Great, thank you so much. Let's see. The technology works. I'm so happy about that. So thanks everybody. I'm so glad you're here. I appreciate it. And one of the things that we're going to do, as Judy said, you know, I run the Spitfire training programs and help people think about those things. And one of the jobs that I do is I go out and find people who are great presenters and bring them in to share their knowledge about communication and different communication topics. And not too long ago, there was for those of you who know DC, there is a bookstore called Politics and Prose, which has a lot of speakers. And so one very cold, snowy January night, I decided I was going to go see this writer who I was very excited about. And so as I was waiting for them to start the program, I was standing by the front door, you know, going through the shelves and everything else. And all of a sudden, the speaker came in. And so I'm taking out all identifying characteristics. So the presenter came in and is sort of a little rushed and everything, and was a little late. And one of their friends came over and said, "Oh, it's so great to see you. We're happy to be here. It's going to be so exciting. What are you going to talk about and what are you going to read from?" And the presenter said, and I quote, "I have no idea. I haven't had a chance to think about it. I'm just going to wing it." And all of us who were there had come out of our warm apartments and driven 25 minutes across DC to hear this person speak. And I find out he hadn't even thought about it. I put in gender. And they were just going to wing it. You know, immediately I thought, this is not a person I necessarily want to hear a presentation from. And so my first lesson to you is this: don't wing it. Be prepared. And if you are not exactly as prepared as you want to be, don't say it out loud. Just keep that to yourself. So the first thing I'm going to do, we're going to do a couple of polls here. And are we ready for the polls? And I want you to just give us your answer. And the first question is, do you currently give presentations, speeches, or speak in front of others? Now, this could be, and I gave you a lot of options because some people say, I don't give speeches, but every so often, you know, I have to do a presentation in front of a group, or I run our staff meeting, or I have to give a presentation in front of our board. So any of those things, go ahead and answer now. Okay, do we have answers? Has everybody had a chance? Oh, see, this is the right group, right? 98%. And because here's what I want to say about this particular webinar is it doesn't matter if you're giving a keynote at a conference or if you are leading a discussion and making a presentation at your department meeting. All of that counts because you want your presentation, the way you speak, to have an impact and to resonate with the people who are listening. So that's great. So how many of you have a speech or presentation coming up? How many of you are about to give a speech or about to give a presentation or about to talk in front of a group? Okay, what's the answer? Oh, good, 80%. That's a lot. So this is great because if you did get, we sent out the presentation planner as a PDF attachment. So if you have that, go ahead and if you have it printed out, or if you use it, or the other thing is, if you don't, just have a scrap piece of paper, and I'm going to lead you through it. And so by the end of the hour, you should be at least have an outline for your presentation. So we're going to make this workable. So this is work time, okay? So if you haven't presented, if you haven't decided what your presentation is going to be structured, we're going to help you do that right now. So the next question, what kind of presentations do you give? So let's see that one. And you can select all that apply. Oh, there's also a link, so you can link to it too. All that apply. Got it? Let's see that answer. Oh, very good. It seems like the most common is classroom presentations. By that, sort of leading people through it, group trainings, meetings, but also conference sessions and regular speeches. Perfect. Okay, great. Excellent. And here's our last question. Be honest. When you talk in front of a group, how does it make you feel? I would rather be doing literally anything else. Going to the dentist, jumping out of an airplane, riding a bronking bull. Oh, good. So we're sort of in the middle. Perfect. Because I'm going to give you some things, not only about structure of the presentation, but also how to think about it, how to calm your nerves. And so we're going to do some best practices too. Perfect. Okay, let's get going then. Next thing. So each time you're presenting, the room is hopefully full of people who are paying attention. These are audience members who are ready to be engaged. They're actively listening. They're soaking it up. And if later they would rate your presentation between good and great, right? Because they're all with you. But our friend Andy Goodman conducted a survey of over 2,500 professionals from, the public interest sector, nonprofits, foundations, government agencies, educational institutions, things like that. And that survey found that 82% of audiences do not rate the presentations they have seen as being good to great when they're asked afterwards. They actually don't think that the presentation was so hot. Now this, of course, is Justice Ginsburg and even Ruth. And this was a State of the Union, if you remember this was a State of the Union address by President Obama. So not even President Obama could interest Justice Ginsburg. So, it's a tough crowd. It's a tough crowd. So I want to ask you, what are your presentation pet peeves? What are the things that drive you crazy when you're in a presentation? And you can just chat it in the box there. Type in what happens that makes you crazy. Side conversations in the audience. Yep, I see that. Reading the PowerPoint. Too much on the slide. Anything else? Rushed speaking, jargon, perfect. Now, all of these things are true. And here's what Andy found out with his survey. Just lack of energy, right? Just not a compelling speaker. Reading the slides, we've already seen that. Reading from a cell phone, I've never seen that, but that sounds like a drag. Trying to pack in too much information into one short time period. So way too long, too much information, and no interaction with the audience or with the presenter. No way for the audience to actually ask questions or process the information. And the last thing that they mentioned was technical problems. Now that could be, I can't hear, it's too, the air conditioner has a rattle, or it's too bright and so I can't see the slides, or all those kind of things. Now most of you, you can figure out all of these things. All of these things are fixable, and hopefully we're going to help you do that in this hour. So here are the things that people wanted the most. They wanted clarity. Someone mentioned this in the text, in the chat. They want to understand. So jargon, overly technical language, those kind of things. Tell me what the point of this is and what I can do. They want enthusiasm from the speaker. So they want there to be energy and life and interaction. They want to hear from the speaker, but they also want to be able to engage with not only with the speaker, but with each other. So here are the things that we're going to cover today. How to ground your talk and make sure that your audiences have the kind of experience that you want them to have, right? So let's go. First, start with strategic considerations. This might sound kind of obvious, but what's the point of your presentation? Not only like why are you giving it, but what do you hope to accomplish and what do you hope the audience walks away with? So with your presentations and in your organization, it should support one of your doable, measurable communication or programmatic objectives. Otherwise, like, why are you doing it? It's also going to make sure that you have something that you're going to ask the audience to do if you're really clear about the point and the objective. And where do you want the audience to be at the end and what do you want them to do? So sometimes when I look at presentations that people send me to sort of give some feedback on, very often there's no evident goal other than to educate. And that's fine, and education is great, but what do you want them to do with that knowledge? So I just want you to make it very clear. Have a main point. The other is, who is the audience? And who's the primary audience you're trying to reach? So who's going to be in the room? You know, and it's fine to have sort of, many of us have like a stock presentation, but we need to tailor it every time for the audience in the room. So funders are not going to receive the same presentation as sort of maybe the communities you're going to work with. And maybe your staff is not going to get the same information as a volunteer. So really think about who's going to be there. And how much do they know about what you're talking about? And what this means is, are they on the beginner level? And so this is sort of introduction to your issue or to your project, or they have been working on it for a while. And so this is going to be more advanced. And very often what happens if we're not sure about this, we either aim too high or we make it so basic that people tune out. So really get to know who the audience is. For those of you who are doing either in the classroom or who are doing conference or speeches in that way, if you're not sure, there are a couple of things you can do. One is you can ask the organizers, who is in the room? Who are these people? What do they know? And how did you find them? And those sorts of things. You can actually ask to have a list of the people who have RSVP'd or a list of the organizations represented. And that will really help you figure out who you're talking to. And also, if you see some of the names, you'll realize where they are in terms of knowledge. Sometimes it's a mixed group, and you have to make sure that you've got some things that are a little basic so people can have access to the information, but you're also going to want to filter in more high level, more advanced information and topics in order to make sure that the people who know about this are not left out in the cold and they're getting something from it as well. The next part is and this is an interesting thing, is what do they believe? What are their attitudes about your topic? So are they skeptical? Are they completely bought in? And that's going to help you also determine what your remarks are going to be. We think about these things in 3 different ways. And sometimes, you know, the belief you have to sort of overcome or have to figure out a way to overcome those obstacles. And we think about it in these 3 ways. So sharing knowledge is that these folks are more on the basic end. They're introductory, right? So you're actually giving them just enough information to get them to take the action you want them to take. And by that, I mean, you're not letting them know everything you know about climate or about biodiversity. You're just giving them enough where they can be enthusiastic and get involved and take that next step. So that's more of a basic kind of thing. Building will is where they know the information, but they're still not taking action. And you've got to figure out what is the likely barrier, what's their holdup, and that how are you going to overcome, get past that barrier in order to help them take action. And the last is reinforcing action. And this is for people, and very often this might be for donors or volunteers, where or people who are already in the environmental movement, where you're going to say, or you know, it could be teachers who are already doing it, where you are thanking them for all the stuff that they've done, their actions. You're getting them prepared for what's coming up ahead. So how do you get them to thank them, pat them on the back, let them know about the good things that have resulted from their hard work, and then what's going to happen next? So reinforcing action, building will, sharing knowledge. These are sort of the three different areas that you can identify your audience. And, you know, they may be at different stages. And in some cases, you may have to decide to focus on just one. But where are most of the people in this group? And like we said, you need to think about an ask. What's the action you want the audience to take? So even if you're sharing knowledge and you're giving them that basic introduction, what do you want them to do with it? So do you want them to check out your website? Do you want them to come and see a program? Do you want them to, what is it you want them to do? And if you're trying to get your audience to do something and you're building will, make sure that the ask is very specific. And not that you're trying to get them to do too many things at once. So if you want them to visit a website for more information, that's great. But don't ask them to visit the website, make a donation, sign this petition. You know, don't ask them to do more than one thing. Ask them to do one big thing that you really want, and that's going to help you get closer to your objective. Okay, any questions so far? Everybody okay?
We don't have any questions yet, Dennis, but we'll keep a lookout.
Let's move on. Okay, so let's think about the structure of your presentations. And here, let me go back to, so if you are looking at your presentation planner, I want you to take one quick minute and do this as we go along. I want you to fill out, just make a note of what communications objective does the presentation support? Like, what's the point? Why are you doing this presentation that's coming up? And who is the target audience? And for the audience, are you sharing knowledge, building will, or reinforcing action? So just take a quick moment and do some check marks there. Everybody got that? What's the point of the presentation you're about to make? Who's going to be there? What stage of knowledge are they at? Sharing, building will, reinforcing action. And the last, what do you want the audience to do at the end of the presentation? Okay, I'm going to give you just a fast second to do that, and then we're going to move on. Okay, here we go. Structure and strategy. How do you feel about this slide, right? So I don't know how many of you use PowerPoint, but let's talk about introductions. Now, if this is the first slide you saw, and this is, I got permission to use this slide, and it is a slide of a group that I work with. But if you saw this slide, and this was the first slide you saw of a presentation, what would you think the rest of the presentation was going to be like? Exactly, right? But I want you to think about a couple of different ways to make your strong presentation opening. So tell a story. And you know, I started this webinar by telling a story about how I find people. Maybe make a compelling statistic. Like, what is something that you're working on that has a surprising stat attached to it that you can use that will just make people think? And the other is make it interactive. And I did this similar thing. I asked you questions about how many of you do presentations and where and all those kind of things. You could do a similar thing, particularly if you don't know the audience. You could do a hand poll. How many of you have ever been, have ever had an environmental education program? So you could ask them questions and figure out right there who is in the room. And that's a great activity and lets them know that you're going to expect them to participate as it goes along. Now here's a slide that's sort of very common, and it has a couple of statistics about an issue. And this is another one of the groups I worked with before. And so it's very, it's fine, and it gives us information. But here's a way that we might think about it as we put this up slide and we actually start having a discussion where people can give their best estimate of what percentage of the world's population is infected with TB, and we can get into the discussion. Or we could do it like this. And maybe even as people come into the room, we are showing them this slide. So as people are gathering, the presentation has already started. They're already looking at this and thinking, that can't be true. That's impossible. How does that even happen? And so already we are putting thoughts into their mind and they're thinking about it. So be thinking about that attention, grabbing, opening, and then after you've done that, then you can go into your bio or establish your credibility, review the main points, or give your agenda, right? And then as we're thinking about the closings, 3 ways to end really strong is the bookend, which is returning to the opening. So sort of close the loop of the entire presentation by reinforcing the opening point. So that would be, I started this presentation with the fact that 1/3 of the world's population is infected with TB, and we have seen blah, 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 right? Or maybe simply restate the main point. So emphasize your key point one more time to make it stick. And the last kind is maybe a vision statement. What will the future look like if the audience does what you want them to? Okay? I'm going to skip over this because I want to get to a couple other points. But here's and people are very often surprised by this. And I say never end with Q&A. And here's why. When you do end with Q&A, and this is very common, where we say, are there any questions? Any questions? And what happens? People start gathering their stuff. They start heading for the exit, right? That's the first thing, because it's all over. The other thing is that somebody asks a question that has no relation to the presentation they just heard. And it's just some crazy question out of the blue. Or it's a person who doesn't have a question, they just want to make a statement. They're going to read their manifesto, right? And so it, once again, has nothing to do with what you just talked about. Or even the saddest thing is where there are no questions at all, and it's just crickets in the background. And so that is when you really feel bad for the presenter, because no one had any question. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to say this. I've saved some time for Q&A, and then after that, I have one final thought I'd like to leave you with. That way, the last word that the audience hears is what you want them to hear, your main point, your final word of wisdom, and not the crazy question or the silence. So don't end with Q&A, always end with your final word of wisdom, the one thing that you want the audience to remember as they leave. Is that a deal? Okay. Any questions? Any questions? Any questions?
Okay, so Dennis, we did have a question about when you were talking about data. I'd love to hear how you translate essential data tables, Likert type, into narratives that keep people's attention but capture the complexity of the data.
Yeah, and very often, here's what you have to do. Very often, because no one wants to see a big chart, right? chart there where the numbers are too small. And, you know, when the presenter says, I know you can't read this, but here's what it says, right? Why is that a slide? So what I want people to think about is, what is the most important piece of information that is supposed to come out of that data, right? What is the one thing that really is the top line? And project that, show that, talk about that. And maybe maybe there is an image or some sort of visual that can capture that, like the globe with the cutout and 1/3 infected with TB. So we might want to think about just making sure that we have the most important point really up there, big, so people can see it and talk about it. But, or the other is to translate it with sort of a visual way, translate that information into a visual sign. Does that help?
That's great, thanks.
Okay, anything else?
We'll save a couple for the next round.
Okay, the next part, identifying your main points. And I always say this, that the structure of your presentation should have 3 to 4 main points max. And the reason why is that is all that people can remember at one time. You don't want to pack too much info into the time you have. And you know, there's always a panel where each panelist is supposed to have 4 minutes, and there's always the person who takes 20, right? And so what we want to do is make sure that you're giving people the information they need, just enough information for them to get excited and to take action. And if you try to pack too much in, people won't remember it, but they will remember that you tried to do it. So you might be thinking, oh no, I have 60 bullet points that are all very, very important. There's no way I can focus on just 4. But think about who your target audience is and what do they care about? Where are they on your issue? How will you get them past their barrier to action? So pick the 4 most salient points, and those are the ones you really want people to take away. So that might be one way to filter all the other things. Very often we think this is our only chance. We will never be able to talk to this group again, so I'm going to tell them everything. And that's always a temptation to pull back from. Tell them just what they need to know. What are the 4 most interesting, most top things that are going to get them on your side and to do what you want them to do? So now that you have 4 points, so we have this thing. So do you have a recommendation for the number of points per length of presentation? 4 points might be hard. Well, yeah, and it really depends on how you're going to present those 4 points, right? And so if you have 15 minutes, maybe you have just 3, right? You're just going to do 3 points or 2 because you want to really spend a lot of time. The point is no more than 4. So if you feel like you're going to spend 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there, and then a couple of minutes on your opening and closing and a couple of minutes on questions, that's perfect. But you're going to give these people the information that they really need to hear from you. Okay? So here are 4 ways to think about the structure. What do they care about? What's the barrier to taking action? What do you want them to do? And what happens if they actually do that? That's sort of that first upper left quadrant. What are they? I'm going to talk about what you care about. I'm going to overcome your barrier without mentioning, without really talking about or declaring what the barrier. I'm going to give you something to do, and then I'm going to tell you, if you do that, here's how what you care about is going to come into play. Otherwise, you might do, this is very simple. Here's the problem as we see it. Here's our solution, the solution of our program or organization. Here's what you can do to help with that solution, and here's the payoff from it, right? Sometimes it's just, I'm going to give you 3 basic facts, and here's something that you can do to overcome or to use these facts. And for this next group, which is, this is the reinforcing action, right? Here's what you did, here's the impact it had, here's what we're going to do next, and then let's talk about that, right? So engage the audience. Make sense? 4 easy ways to structure. So the next thing I want you to do is I want you to look at your paper. I want you to think about, and you'll see here, there's the attention grabbing opening. So you're not going to have time right now to actually create the opening, but maybe what would you like to try and do? Would you like to tell a story? Would you like to do a poll? Would you like to do some sort of interactive kind of activity? So just write that down. And then I want you to also, this is great. So is this Irene? What are those main points you want to do? So just really quickly say, here are the main points I want to cover in my presentation. And then here's how I think I'm going to close it. Okay, so take a minute and make some notes about your opening, your closing, and what are the 3 main points you'd like to cover. All right, I'm going to give you a sec. Make some notes. Okay, here we go. The next part is, how do I actually make this interactive? And you've already seen me do it a couple of different ways, right? And one way is just, you know, what you're just now doing, and you're still doing it, which is make some notes. Write down an idea that you have. Write down who you might want to work with. So you can ask people to actually make those notes and sometimes share them back. So you might want to do a brainstorm. You might want them to do a personal assessment or a program assessment, because that's what you're really trying to get them to do, is to think about the efficacy of what they're working on. You might break the group up into a small group and have them talk about what you just have been presenting on. Or it's even as simple as turn to your neighbor and tell them something that you have been doing that relates to the topic. So there are those different kinds of ways. And then you've also seen here how we have projected visual data, visual images, and then have people talk about it. Here's an example, another example from the Active Living Resource Center. Now, so the way that they do this, it's very interesting. They put this slide up and they ask the audience, you know, what's going on? What's happening here? What's wrong? And this is a group that encourages people to get out, to walk, to use public transport, but to really use their bicycles and their legs in order to get more exercise, but also to make the city a more livable place. So after people have looked at this for a while, they point out that there is the pedestrian, right? There's no sidewalks, there are no crosswalks, but this poor person who is trying just to get through life is stuck in the middle of all this traffic. And that's one way they can really point out their questions. Also, don't forget to tell a story. Include at least one story in your presentation, either at the opening, the closing, support for a main point, but or maybe you keep referring back to it as an example, but tell a story. This is how we learn. We're hardwired to both tell and listen to stories. And this might be one of the most effective ways of connecting with your audience. And here are some different types of stories that every nonprofit organization should know about, should collect, and should use. One is the nature of our challenge. And this is the challenge your organization faces or the problems that it's trying to fix. And it's good for helping new people to the work or to the issue understand what you're working on and why it's crucial. And sometimes it's focusing on an individual who's struggling with a problem. So it not necessarily is always a happy ending, but sometimes it can be a cliffhanger, but it offers hope because you're there working to solve this problem. I'm going to get to that question, Judy, in just a little bit. So I thank you for asking it. How we got started. This shouldn't be self-evident. Why and how your organization came to be. And very often, sometimes it focuses on the founder or illustrates the problem they wanted to solve or why they chose to get involved. And sometimes it's why you do what you do. Why are you involved in this work? What's your personal connection to it? Sometimes that's the story. And this is good for new audiences and it builds your credibility, and it provides background information about the mission of the organization and your particular connection to it. The next is performance. This is a, you know, it's a great sort of way that there are stories about your organization's people and the work that they do. It's about problem solving, the lessons you've learned. So this not only introduces audiences, new audiences to your work. So it's very often, it's really good for new volunteers, for donors, that kind of thing, or new staff. It reinforces your reputation and your brand with audiences who know you, but it also shows your organization's strength, right, in the face of different challenges. So that's always good. Where we're going is a visionary story. This is what the future looks like once our work is done. So this is the only story that sort of you're allowed to sort of make up, right? Because in the future, when everybody has, you know, enough environmental education, here's what the world looks like. So it's a great motivator for people inside the organization. It reminds them of why they're doing what they're doing, why the work is valuable, and it's a great inspiration for external audiences to engage with you. Emblematic success, this is like when you're firing on all cylinders. Here's what happens when we're really going the distance, and it's the value, once again. This story has to have a happy ending. So this is when we're doing our best, very best work, and what our success looks like. And then striving to improve. This is when things don't always go the way they should go, but you learned a lesson from it and you're doing better. So this story very often is used internally for staff members, that kind of thing. So they can figure that out. Questions? We're all good? I'm going to answer this questions about best tips for psyching yourself up. I'm going to answer that question here in just a second. Any other questions right now about the types of stories or making things interactive? I want you to take one moment, do step 4 on this planner. Like, think, what is one way you might make your presentation interactive, right? Would you have a group discussion, turn to your neighbor, Q&A in the middle, just think about it. And then what kind of story might you tell? What type of story might you tell in your presentation? So just make a note to yourself. Take a moment.
And Dennis, we just had one other question that came up. Is there an ideal length of a program?
There really isn't. And very often you are, you know, the organizer is going to give you a time limit. You got 10 minutes, you got 15 minutes. Or if you're giving a speech at the annual gala, you know, you might decide that. But remember that people have just a certain amount of attention span. So all of the things that we're talking about now are going to help people stay interested and stay engaged. So whether you have to really shrink it or you have enough time to really go the distance and really go into greater detail, remember to fit these things in so it doesn't slow down and that people stay involved and they stay listening. Because pretty much the science shows that after about 20 minutes, people just go off, you know, they just start going down. They're just the attention span. So you really need to break that up. So our guideline is never speak for more than 20 minutes without giving people something to do. Ask questions, make notes, talk to some way to interact with each other or interact with you. So just sort of remember that 20-minute rule, because that's when people's attention span starts plummeting. Okay, great. So now you have a presentation. Let's think about this. I'm going to show you this because I think we'll talk about this a little more.
Back in New York, I am the head of development for a nonprofit called Robin Hood. When I'm not fighting poverty, I'm fighting fires as the assistant captain of a volunteer fire company. Now, in our town, where the volunteers supplement a highly skilled career staff, you have to get to the fire scene pretty early to get in on any action. I remember my first fire, I was the second volunteer on the scene, so there was a pretty good chance I was going to get in. But still, it was a real foot race against the other volunteers to get to the captain in charge to find out what our assignments would be. When I found the captain, he was having a very engaging conversation with the homeowner, who was surely having one of the worst days of her life. Here it was, the middle of the night. She was standing outside in the pouring rain, under an umbrella, in her pajamas, barefoot, while her house was in flames. The other volunteer who had arrived just before me, let's call him Lex Luthor, got to the captain first and was asked to go inside and save the homeowner's dog. The dog! Oh, I was stunned with jealousy. Here was some lawyer or money manager who for the rest of his life gets to tell people that he went into a burning building to save a living creature. Just because he beat me by 5 seconds. Well, I was next. The captain waved me over. Bezos, I need you to go into the house. I need you to go upstairs, past the fire, and I need you to get this woman a pair of shoes. I swear. So, not exactly what I was hoping for, but off I went. Up the stairs, down the hall, past the real firefighters who were pretty much done putting out the fire at this point. Into the master bedroom, get a pair of shoes. Now, I know what you're thinking, but I'm no hero. I carried my payload back downstairs where I met my nemesis and the precious dog by the front door. We took our treasures outside to the homeowner, where, not surprisingly, his received much more attention than did mine. A few weeks later, the department received a letter from the homeowner thanking us for the valiant effort displayed in saving her home. The act of kindness she noted above all others, someone had even gotten her a pair of shoes. In both my vocation at Robin Hood and my avocation as a volunteer firefighter, I am witness to acts of generosity and kindness on a monumental scale. But I'm also witness to acts of grace and courage on an individual basis. You know what I've learned? They all matter. So as I look around this room at people who either have achieved or are on their way to achieving remarkable levels of success, I would offer this reminder. Don't wait. Don't wait until you make your first million to make a difference in somebody's life. If you have something to give, do it now. Serve food at a soup kitchen, in a neighborhood park, be a mentor. Not every day is going to offer us a chance to save somebody's life. Every day offers us an opportunity to affect one. So get in the game. Save the shoes. Thank you.
Okay, so this was a 5-minute presentation. So this goes to Andrea's question, is there an ideal length? So you can pack in a lot of information in just those 5 minutes. And here's sort of the arc that he used, right? His opening and closing, and then 3 points or 3 sort of markers where he was going. So an interesting thing for you to think about is how are you going to write this down? The way we write is different than the way we talk. I encourage people to make bullet points about here are the main things I want to hit, and then go with that and let your voice take over. But also what tone is, he took a humorous tone, and his story actually was the majority of his presentation, and he used that story to illustrate his main point. But for you to think about what tone is going to be best for you. I'm also going to say a little bit about rhetorical techniques, and he hit quite a few, but this is the way that we talk, and this is the way that resonates with humans. This is just the way we do. Rhetorical contrast, right? He talked about, he has generosity and kindness on a monumental scale, grace and courage on an individual basis. Monumental scale, individual basis. He had puzzles and questions. And what this means is you have some way for people to think about this. If you ask a rhetorical question, people will answer it in their head. So if you can, Ask them a question. Don't expect an answer, but know that they're thinking about it. The list of 3, always perfect. Serve food at a soup kitchen. Clean up a neighborhood park. Be a mentor. The list of 3, 3 is a sacred number. We also have paint a picture. Use visual language so we can see the incident. We can see the people. We can see the classroom. We can see the outdoors. But make sure that your language really illustrates and really draws us in. The dramatic pause. He had a couple. But before you make a main point, after you make a main point, pause so the information can get into people's heads and they can really focus on it. If you don't stop talking, there's no space for them to really sink in with the information. Anecdotes, tell a story. Include the audience. And this means the language that you use. We, us, our, together. Make sure that you are including them as part of the solution and a part of the work. And then repetition. You want to make sure that there's that drumbeat.
Don't wait.
So very often what we want to
Don't wait till you
hear,
make your first million to make a difference in someone's
right?
life.
He says, don't wait a couple of times. So make sure it allows this rhythm to build up that we really like. The Moynihan moment is, what's the sound bite? What's the sentence that you want them to take away? Here it's, don't forget the shoes. But what is, from your talk, what is the one main thing that you want them to hear and remember as they're going out of the room? So review your presentation before you give it, practice it, and make sure that you sort of got it down. What we hear is that a lot of times people don't talk about or don't even say the words out loud until they're actually giving the presentation. Don't make that mistake. Actually practice. Okay? Now, let's quickly go through a couple of things that you can do to make sure that you are ready to go. So we talked about pausing, free up your breathing and voice before speaking. Make sure that you have all these 3 channels, that your voice is warmed up and ready, that people can hear you. You're speaking loudly enough where the folks in the back can hear you. If you can use a microphone, if they have one for you, always ask for one. That's a great thing to do. Use your energy. Make sure your mother was right. Make sure you stand up straight. Use gestures, but don't go wild with gestures, right? Gestures are how we communicate with people and how we help them visualize what we're talking about. Make eye contact with people. Look through the room. Sometimes we're scared and we go too high, or we avoid and we look at the floor, but sort of choose people there and talk to them and sort of bounce around a little bit. So you're including all of the room. And then your words. Be careful of jargon, insider language, technical language. Make sure that people understand what you're talking about. And if you're talking to a very sophisticated technical audience, even if you're using some sort of term, then define it. Say, when I say sustainable, I mean this. And therefore, that even if they disagree with you, they understand what you're talking about and how you're using terms that maybe are very common, but have different meanings for different people. Make sense? Now, here are the things that, get in the way of people, that they get very, very nervous. And what I want to say about this is always breathe, right? Make sure that you are calm, that you are, because when you don't breathe, your voice gets very tight, you start, all those kind of things happen, you know what happens. So breathe deep, continue to breathe, and just remember. Connect with the audience. One way to do this is before the presentation, greet people who are coming in the room. Either people you know, people you don't know. Say, hi, I'm Dennis. I'm going to be talking today. Where are you from? Let them connect with you and you connect with them. That way, you've got some friendly faces in the crowd, right? And you can always talk to those folks. And they're rooting for you because they already have met you. Know that your value. Know what you're trying to do here. Know that you've got important information to give. And we really want you to say, it's not about me, it's about the information. It's about the people who are not here, the people who have to speak, and I'm presenting this information on their behalf. So take your ego out of it and say, I'm just giving information that people really need and want to use. Another way is not to put on your professor voice, right? Communicate with people, just make it a conversation, talk casually or as casually as you can, but make it in a way that you are breaking up the ideas. People have a chance to accept it and sort of hear it, grapple with it, but really make it a back and forth conversation. And finally, enjoy yourself. Just make sure that this is a good thing. Those people out there are your friends. You've got great information. Something good is going to happen from this, whether it's more money, more volunteers, more teachers out there doing the work, or whatever it is. But know that this presentation has value and it's going to result in super things. I've saved some time for Q&A, and after that, I'm going to leave you with one final thought. See how I did that? Perfect, right? Okay, as we're gathering the questions, Judy, do you have some stuff you want to share?
Yes, but I had one other question come up about how do you deal with interruptions, technological or people interruptions while you're giving a talk? And meanwhile, I'll take control again.
Well, here's what I do. I always have so if my PowerPoint is going to go down, which I always assume it's going to, I make sure that I have my notes there ready to go. And I have a plan for if something goes off, right? Or if, I had a person, I was doing a conference presentation and I had a person collapse in the middle of it. And we just had to stop, right? And make sure that medical attention was given. And then we just started up again. So anything can happen, but just have your notes ready, be so fully prepared that you can keep going. And if there is always know who the AV person is so they can come and fix the problem while you're going on with your presentation.
Great. Well, Dennis, thank you. We're just going to go through a couple of slides and then back to you for the final thought.
Okay.
And I'm sure there will be more coming in. Again, you will get a recording of this. All our webinars are shared on EE Pro, which means that you can re-listen to this many times. We also would love your feedback on all of these. If you can, and Sai will put the link into the chat room, just how we're doing. We have some other exciting webinars coming up. First, of course, we have our conference, which we'll talk about in a minute, and we have Social Justice in Schools by Sydney Chafee coming up in November. So stay tuned and find out more, and there's still time to register for Spokane. I think we're going to have over 1,200 people at our annual conference, and again, we will do a tribute to Pepe at the conference, along with so many exciting keynotes and sessions and so much else. So final thoughts, Dennis?
Yeah, so Laura, thank you for reminding us of Migo. My eyes glaze over. That's the one thing you want to avoid. So here are my final thoughts to you. My final thought is always know your objective. Always know who you were trying to reach. Make sure you know your objective and your audience. The voice and your body are part of the presentation. Not only the words you say, but how you say them and what your body is doing while you're speaking. And finally, always practice and get feedback. So if you have a colleague who is on this webinar and you have the presentation planner, get with them and practice in front of them and ask for feedback so they are able to really give you some pointers on the things that you did well and the ways that you could even make it stronger. Thanks a lot, everybody. We appreciate you taking the time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Dennis, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone who joined, and we will talk to you in Spokane and on our next webinar. Thank you, and thank you, Sai and Kristen, for all the support. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.